Welcome to Connected Intelligence, a podcast about all the things we bring to work that aren't actually about the work. Join us in conversation about the building blocks that bring complex ideas to life, not the code, calculations, or research, but the bonds between teammates, the connection to your purpose, and the character that you build along the way. Welcome back, listeners. I'm your host, Sonia Senek. Today's episode features not one, but two thought leaders, Professors Maja Djikic and Tiziana Casciaro. Maja is an associate professor and the director of the Self-Development Laboratory at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. Tiziana is a professor of organizational behavior and the Marcel Desautels Chair in Integrative Thinking at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. This conversation is a blend of the thought leadership between both of them. We discuss Maja's recently published book, The Possible Self, A Leader's Guide to Personal Development, and integrate these learnings with elements of Power for All, How It Really Works and Why It Is Everyone's Business, a book Tiziana co-authored in 2021. I'm thrilled to share this insightful discussion with you. We discuss self-development, its impact on relationships, the balance of power, and how interconnected each of these elements are in your work and your life. Please enjoy Professors Maja Djikic and Tiziana Casciaro. What a day. Okay. This has been months in the making, bringing this dynamic duo together. Thank you for coming back to the podcast, both of you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonia. Awesome to be here with Maja.
So the idea is to blend Maja's research on the self and her new book, The Possible Self. Tiziana, your research on organizational behavior and power and how power moves through organizations and people. I thought, what an interesting way to blend both of you in one conversation.
Perfect.
Okay, so I want to start, Maja, with you. One of my favorite quotes from your book is, "Who we believe we are is the enemy of who we want to become." Can you share a bit about how you see social contracts in relationships and the impact on the self?
Yeah, interesting. The thing about social contract is that when we meet people, we meet them in a moment, and in a moment, they exhibit a set of qualities. So I think what happens to us is that we just anticipate them to stay the same for a long period of time, when really they're growing, developing beings. So the contract that we have with people is a little bit like, you stay in your box and I'll stay in mine. And then if you start changing, well, what am I going to do then? And I think becomes an obstacle to people changing and developing.
So, Tiziana, when we talk about individuals changing and the impacts on personal relationships, of course, there's an exchange of power. Can you talk us through how you define power and how it's relative in a personal relationship, and how an evolving self can actually disrupt that dynamic?
Well, power really exists within relationships. It's not an absolute idea. I'm not powerful in general. I'm powerful in relation to you or dependent on you. Mm-hmm. So with Maja's ideas about change unavoidably modify the power relationship between people, because the things that I value at any point in time might be shifting. And power is all about having control over resources I value. You have power over me if you can give me access to something I really want. And if you understand what I want, and I am not changing dramatically from moment to moment, you will be able to exercise some influence over me, because I will depend on you. And in the process of depending on you, I will be very responsive to the things you can offer to me. But if I change and I modify even my own understanding of what I want, your sway over me will also change. So it's going to be a constant interplay. And the more people listen to Maja and keep changing, the more dynamic and messy and this thing will become. But in the messiness, it could also become a lot more productive, depending on how the change unfolds.
So that point about power existing in relationships, and Maja, you focus on the personality and self-development. Mm-hmm. So let's say somebody's experiencing
the feeling of power in a relationship. And that starts to get disrupted either by them changing or somebody else changing. How does that show up in your work, and how do you see people go through moments like that?
So it's interesting when I think of inner change in relation to Tiziana's fabulous work in her book on power. The way that my mind works, I almost don't see it as disrupting, but adding to, and I'm sure there would be a wrong term. I'll call it inner power. So what is that individual inside can do that adds to, if I develop a skill of being empathetic and kind, tends to be the kind of thing that people value, and suddenly my power raises in relation to what is it that they tend to want. If I work on my ability to produce new choices for myself in the world so that there's more, that might also then increase this power. If I figure out how to fulfill some wants that I have without always relying on others, let's say that I used to need a lot of validation from others, but now I can kind of validate myself. I don't need validation from them. Suddenly I have reduced the things that I need from them. So there is this way that one can increase through inner transformation. They can increase their inner power. And I'm not sure if I'm using this term correctly here. I think their ability to hold and have power by something that they just do inside of themselves. It doesn't have to be this big organizational thing, although obviously it can be. But I think there's a lot of things people can do inside of themselves to increase what is it valuable about them to others, how to have these other options. There's one part of Tiziana's theory that I also love, this sort of consolidation, reducing numbers of choices for kind of others. Even that requires a skill of negotiating, of talking to other people. And if you have barriers to being able to do that, then, each of these 4 different points of increasing your power, there's an inner bit that can be done on the inside, I find.
Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Maja, of course. There's nothing new there. So you can decrease your dependence on others to provide these valuable things that you really, really need, if you have found them within yourself. The second piece is that you are less likely to engage in destructing of value. There is a wonderful quote from Maja's book. Can we put
Let's
it up?
do it up. Yeah.
Can we put it up? I thought that there was one of the many, many brilliant quotes, because it's the one that says, destructive wants, wanting to undermine, hurt, or destroy oneself or others, start with the developmental want at the very center. So what Maja is telling us is that much of the horrendous behaviors that sometimes we see in organizations, with people destroying themselves in the process, because this is not a very happy way to live, and others, because everything is relational in organizations, absolutely everything. We go to organizations because we cannot do a certain thing alone. We need all these other people. And so it's a constant web of relationships. If you engage with them like this, unavoidably, you are decreasing the value that this organization can achieve together, because you're so needy to address these unresolved things within yourself that you can't relate to others constructively. You cannot add value. You're trying desperate to acquire value from them, but because you're not directing it in the right places, you're sometimes maybe just putting a rubber band. Is that a word?
Yeah.
On the problem without really addressing the underlying need and want.
Yeah, and sometimes you even are asking for things that people can't provide to. It's not their place to provide in an organization. So when you think about like people really feeling a sense of value, of course that you want bosses who value, but if you have a deep core of being insecure, your boss will never be able to give you enough value for you to calm that place, because that place has to be developed. And you might then start doing things to your colleagues or in order to just to get this thing that you want, when really we need to look inward and do some inner work. And so we can't approach our organizations with these so many unfulfilled wants that we want these other people to fulfill for us. We need to start with knowing what's ours and what's theirs.
Yeah. And I would add that when you have these wants that are unfulfilled, you open yourself up to influence from others that you may not want. If they figure out that Abhinav is the name of one of your protagonists, this poor guy who works like a dog, trying to resolve some guilt about not doing as much as he should have, or he thinks he should have. This is the perfect kind of soul, broken soul, that you can work to death in an organization. I'm your manager. I intuit, or I know that that's your weak spot. And if I am bad and insensitive and maybe a little ungenerous, I will exploit it. So these are, I know, unfulfilled wants. Open yourself to these influences that may be quite detrimental at the end of the day for everybody, because this is a recipe for burnout. If I'm a manager, I certainly don't want my people to collapse. I'm not going to get anything out of them anyway. So the whole dynamic becomes counterproductive.
So this is a great example of your work interlacing. So I'd say in this case with Abhinav, he has an area of himself that needs to be developed. And you have some really practical examples of how he can develop it through telling the story. So, and because he has this area that needs to be developed, as Tiziana points out, it could create a potentially very big power dynamic or power imbalance with someone that's guiding him and leading him. Can you take us through the story of Abhinav a little bit for our listeners?
So Abhinav was a child of immigrants who came and had to work very, very hard, very low status, painful jobs for Abhinav and his brother to have access to education that they want and to flourish in their life. And so Abhinav in his adult life was just working so hard, partially out of sort of this deep guilt he felt towards his parents, this intense overworking or even suffering and the pain he was getting from it were somehow expiating the guilt that he was having. So notice what's very interesting to me about cases like Abhinav is that you have something that presents like a work problem, like working too much, that at the core have nothing to do with work. What really stands out to me from his story and other stories of people I've seen is that this one thing that looks just behavior, it seems very clear cut, can't be addressed on its own until you go deep into the whole person. He was able to address and deal with the guilt, with the negative emotion, and process them, really leave the past behind, that he was able to engage not only with his work more productively, but actually even with his parents, whom he has treated as these suffering people from, 30 years ago, rather than the very comfortable parents they were at that point. What presents sometimes as a work problem has things that are entirely not work related, and vice versa.
And Tiziana, how does power show up in that story beyond his potential to be, manipulated by a bad boss, also within his personal relationships and his relationship with himself?
Well, he has a need to show that he can contribute, and it can come at the expense of everything else that he still needs to do. Loving his family, being there for them in forms that are not just him being at work all the time. It's a hugely valuable resource for him to contribute to the dynamic in his family, and he's shortchanging everybody because he's wrapped up in fulfilling just one of the needs. And why? Because it became sticky in Maja's way to describe how it absorbs all of your energy, and our energy is so limited. And when you spend it all on the one thing that you think is almost a compulsion at this point, you deprive everyone of the resources they really need from you, which is your love and your presence and your time and your attention and your ability to be understanding of what they're going through. And, you're too self-focused at that point to be able to do that.
I love what Tiziana is saying. All these things that she has just said, love, attention, presence, ability, all these are sources of power. because all these are things that other people value enormously. And so people sometimes say, well, I'm just so powerless. I'm this little, we have at our disposal so many things that people value without knowing that. And I think what's wonderful is just to remind ourselves what they are. There's so many things that you do not need money or position in your organization to be able to provide.
This has a direct reflection on organizations, actually. There's another beautiful quote from Maja's book. It's going to be like this. So this quote is very, very important, both for your personal development and for your behavior in an organization. So it says, the most efficient use of willpower is to move emotions, mind, and all neural pathways rather than act directly on behaviors. This is what organizations do all the time. You want people to do certain things, to execute certain tasks, to engage in certain actions. Those are all behaviors. So what you do, you create structures, processes, incentives, so that your employees will behave in a certain way. And in the process of doing that, all that leads them to want to engage in the behavior, to be able to engage in the behavior, to have the cognitive, emotional capabilities to do it, is left unsaid, unaddressed. Not always, of course. There are many times when organizations are smarter than that. But I hear this from many managers, especially new managers. They maybe got that job because they were very good individual contributors. They were excellent performers. And all of a sudden they have to deal with all these people. And they want the people to do certain things. And the people don't do them. And then you go, like, why don't you do them? It makes so much sense. Well, honey, I'm not doing them because you haven't dealt with the emotions. You haven't dealt with the mind. You haven't dealt with all the things that people bring to the organization. Now, is it the manager's role to understand each employee that deeply? No, of course, you cannot go there. But the concept that at work we can do without all of these feelings, because you are really trying to get to the end result without taking any of the steps that make the end result possible. And so, maybe you can squeeze the behavior out of people for a while, but it's not sustainable. At the moment you you take your eyes off them, they will do something else. And it becomes frustrating all around for everybody. So you need to remember that you're human and you need things. They are human, they need things. And yes, as you say in your book, it's a lot of work. Nobody says it's an easy stroll in the park, but it's so rewarding when you engage in it, because you finally get people to want to engage in their behavior and maybe even tell you that's not a behavior we need. We need another one.
Yes.
And correct course and help you find the right goals for the organization and for them. I mean, this is a kind of mutually enhancing. We all learn in the process, but you have to open yourself up to the fact that we're not in these pseudo-rational systems where emotions are all expendable.
Yeah.
They're part of what we do.
Integrated in.
Integrated in.
People make the same mistake that they make on their own behavior. So when they try to change, they just push their own behavior and then fragment themselves in the process. So in a sense, these young managers, they have been kind of raised in the psychology of like, just do it, just behavior, even for themselves. So they then do that with their employees. And so in the same way that you would fragment yourself by overdoing behaviors and not bringing the rest of you with, you're fragmenting your employees because their minds are not on board. They're having negative feelings. They don't have the motivations. The more you push them, the more you fragment and drain them, rather than spend a little bit more time at the front end as a manager, helping to bring the whole person on board. And that's so that you don't have to spend time at the back end of dealing with problems and burnout and all the things that Tiziana has just said.
Part of Maja's book includes reflecting on the impact of the past on the present self. So she tells the stories of her protagonists in her book, and we get a bit of their life history to understand why are they behaving the way they're behaving. To make the comparison to an organization, there's something such as a corporate memory, right? There's burdens of the past behaviors or activities that have happened in an organization. How can leaders work with that to resolve it, repair it, and sort of evolve into the future?
Well, there's wonderful work on imprinting in organizations, and parallel to that, on culture, obviously. The history of the organization is captured in its ongoing cultural values. That tells us what is expected, how I'm supposed to behave, and you cannot understand the impact of any of that if you don't understand where it came from. Why is it that we have these norms around here? And often imprinting is one of the processes that lead us there. Somebody early on started to engage in certain behaviors, started to design certain structures and processes, started to make choices. Who do we get in? Who do we kick out? How do we ask them to work together? What kind of compensation structure do we put in place to, push certain behaviors and avoid others? All of those things accumulate into a cultural imprint. And you're never going to be able to change your organization, make progress, move forward if you don't understand your history. That's where we come from. And so the analytical, kind of curious understanding of why we do the things we do this way is the secret to great leadership. Because, it really doesn't deny the past. It doesn't deny that there's a whole baggage of decisions that were made in the past that still has lingering effects. And you're not going to be able to morph away or modify your trajectory unless you really understand them. So you're going to become an historian of your own organization in many ways.
And just like there's personal trauma, there is such a thing as organizational trauma.
Oh, for sure.
And that could be quite confronting. So the question of, hey, why do we do things this way? Have we thought about changing this or changing that? For someone who's maybe been at an organization for 5, 10, or 20 years, that may feel a little frightening, that kind of change. And what advice would you have for leaders that are on the precipice of needing to evolve, but maybe hanging on to the past? And I'm making a comparison to, Maja says a great quote of some people just say, well, that's just how I am, or this is who I am, when they refer to their personality. Similarly, in corporations or organizations, people can say, well, this is just how it is here. And how can leaders work past that?
Maja talks about energy, being able to summon enough energy to engage with these bigger, more challenging questions. And so I think there's no avoiding taking a close look at yourself and understanding why do you need to skip over those questions. It's because you're depleted enough to not be able to really engage with the questions that require real thought, real pausing, abandoning things that are convenient because they make life easy in the short run, but they don't help you in the long run. But you're not going to be able to do that unless you resolve some of the things that get you in trouble. And one of the ones that I see a lot in organizations is the need to control. They need to keep people in their lane, because the worry that when you unleash folks, they will go in directions that you cannot anymore contain is real. And the only way you can really get to the point where you're capable of unleashing is, one, you've allowed them to develop enough that they know what they're doing. Because if I unleash folks that don't have the capabilities, don't have the resources, don't have the strategic intent, bad things happen. So sometimes managers that kind of hold it together a little bit more tightly, they do it for a reason, because people are not there yet. Maybe you're changing your direction and they're not prepared for the change. But that is the optimistic case, when you're holding control because you have to, and there are real reasons, and you still have to develop folks enough. The bad side is when you're controlling because you can't handle letting go. You need to protect yourself too much.
Are you protecting yourself or also your experience of power?
Oh, well, power is always intertwined with these things. The need to control is very well embedded with power. And the good news is that sometimes you can turn it into what power at its best really is, which is energy. It's the very energy that Maja talks about. It's the resource you need to move forward. And the things that are more difficult to move are the ones that require more energy and therefore more power. But the dark side of that beautiful, energetic form of power is this need to control, this need to stop people from surprising you, from doing things that you haven't told them to do, telling you the things you're doing wrong, which is the worst possible thing when one of your unfulfilled needs, many of us, is not worthy.
Mm-hmm.
That your sense of worth is not satisfied.
So you have to be right all the time.
You have to be right all the time, and you have to be feel competent and in control all the time.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, sometimes the best work you can do that makes you feel very worthy, it comes from letting others chime in.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't do it.
And when I hear Tiziana talking about the imagery of people, running in all sorts of different directions, and so this need to maybe control the lanes or the spots that different energies going towards, I'm thinking about it as it compares to the self. And you talk about the 5 different parts of the self. Do you see a comparison to how an individual can try to hold those pieces very tightly, not wanting them to change and not wanting one part of themselves to get too far away from where they thought they would be? Does that get in the way?
If I ask them about something that is, let's say, painful or difficult for them, they say, well, I don't want to open that can of worms. There's this perpetual can of worms that nobody wants to open, that we clearly live with it, but we're not opening it. So there's some worms there kind of breeding more. And so there's this sense often of at least whatever I have, it's not optimal. It's not, it doesn't even feel good, but I'll hold this because the unpredictable, all the things that can come out that are negative base, if I open something, becomes too overwhelming. And that's the kind of energy that it feels too exhausting. Sometimes people tell me it's too exhausting. I can't even have that emotion. And so, we need to think very carefully about this energy management, because to do the inner work, to allow ourselves to look deeply into things that require change, we need to not be scraping the bottom of our cup all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do that too long, there's things that are going to be happening to us that are going to take us away from the inner change and more towards just trying to kind of mop up the damage, by almost biological and organizational damage that is done by exhausted, burnt out people doing what they think they can in a not optimal situation.
Sitting among their closed cans of worms.
So, yes, exactly.
So how do we go from not wanting to open the can of worms to not just opening it up, but going fishing? How does an organization do that?
There are always 2 approaches to making the organization better. One is to work on the people and create opportunities for them to work on themselves, and making it not only allowed but encouraged. Not every organization does that. Not every organization makes it possible for a young professional or a new manager or a new leader or an old leader to develop, to go and find an executive coach or engage in those broader readings that might change, your ability to open a can of worms. It takes guts to do that. As you say, it's tiring, and it's this in at first. When you start to have breakthroughs, then it becomes magical. But it's work, right? So there is that. There is the organization encouraging people to develop themselves and giving the tools and space, time to do that. And then you have good old structure, where you design things in a way that makes it possible for people to communicate with folks that are not in their immediate domain, that encourages new ideas. Maybe they're a little dumb, but in the dumbness of it all, you can come up with that idea in and of itself, honestly, you gotta, it's not that good. But if we see from this other angle, there's something there. And so, you have to engage. This is what you used to call brainstorming. No idea is stupid. Every idea is good, because even from something that makes no sense, you can trigger a new thought. So you create structures, processes where these kinds of exchanges occur more frequently, where people don't get so concentrated in their own little group that they never ask the curious questions. Those questions, Sonia, you were talking about. Why do we do it this way? Couldn't we do it the other way? But for that to happen, you have to make it acceptable and, in fact, really rewarded to do that. And it's all design. These things come from how you structure the units, how you delayer the organization when you create a whole lot of verticality, where everybody has to ask for permission to do anything. Not only one permission, 2, 3, 4 permissions. Then innovation is never going to come up, because I know that my boss or my boss's boss is going to go like, Tiziana, what's the matter with you? Stay nice and centered on the goal, and don't engage in all of this kind of weird, shooting from the hip. But it's all designed, some of these things.
There's an interesting, I think, tension between individuals and organizations, where in organizations it kind of pays, people think that it pays to have people perform what they do best. So it's like, their best performing organizational selves are the ones that know what they're doing, versus for development, you need the exploration and trying to do something else. What sometimes organization can say is like, we don't want you to explore, just stay in your lane, be yourself, stay in your box, and do the thing so that we can kind of control the outputs, and we can control the output. They're not counting in the innovation, the development that comes from getting out of your lane.
And when you said structure as the second, so first is developing the self or developing people. The second way is you can adjust your structure or develop your structure. Can you speak a little bit, Tiziana, about how structure is actually quite a dynamic thing? I think when people hear that word, they think it's fixed. This is the way this functions. It's always functioned this way. There's a manual for it. This is how this organization runs. Why is it so important to see structure as something that can evolve and be dynamic?
Well, it's definitely dynamic, but there is something relatively stable about structure by definition, almost. Otherwise, it's not structure. Structure reflects kind of relatively stable patterns of interaction, of behavior, right? So once you design something, which could be what Maja was talking about, you create subcomponents of the structure that can handle both the exploitation of the things that we do really well and the exploration of the things that we want to learn to do better. There's wonderful research on this, on the ambidexterity of organizations, so that you can do both, but you have to have dedicated structures for these things, because some structures are conducive to creativity and new thoughts. Others are much better for just doing the things that we do and doing it exquisitely well, precisely, without error, and so on and so forth. Those things are relatively stable. What's dynamic is how you take the feedback from what the structure produces and make adjustments along the way. And for that, you require not only adaptable structures, but adaptable minds and adaptable relationships. This is where the relational side of organizations is so important. We have old research that show that in a moment of crisis, you can have the information to address the crisis. But if you don't have relationships of trust, of closeness, where people think Maja is going to look out for me, she's not going to damage me, she's not going to hurt me, what information comes from Maja, I will take and I will use it, versus this other person over there. I don't know where they're coming from. We're not close. We haven't had the chance to really connect. And I don't want to hear what they have to say, even when it's completely relevant to addressing the emergency, the moment of transformation. So this you're back to this relational quality that you cannot accomplish unless you have dealt with yourself. You can deal with yourself first before you can relate to others productively. So structure, personal development, both necessary, both contribute and both are really feeding each other. You cannot just do it with one.
Maja's book outlines 5 pieces of the wheel of self. So motivations, behaviors, emotions, thoughts, and the body. Tiziana, as you read through the book, did you see any parallels to the necessary requirements for organizational growth, an organizational wheel of self, or a wheel of organization, as it were?
Yeah, no, I think we talked a little bit about it earlier when we, were bemoaning at some level the obsession of organizations on behavior and treating all the other parts as a nuisance. Like, oh, well,
They have emotions.
they have needs. And now I want them to come back to work at the office, and they don't want to. And if there were machines, man, wouldn't it be easier? Because I would put the machine in the office, and then they wouldn't have to. I wouldn't have to negotiate such thing. And all of that speaks to the wheel of organizations. That just like human beings, you need to attend to all of the above, because the organization is not just functioning based on mechanical behaviors.
Outputs.
It's just not. Maybe one day we'll get to that point. I doubt it, actually. I doubt it. Many, many things will still require humanity to be productive, to be sustainable for us. And until that point, when some miraculous thing happens, such as we let the robots do everything, we will still need the emotional undertone and the bodies that carry all of these experiences within us. That book, The Body Keeps the Score, still captures a fundamental truth. And as long as there are going to be humans on this earth, we are going to have to deal with the wheel. The person and the organizational wheel. And any manager that listens to this has to not only accept it, but embrace it, because they have a wheel too. The manager, the leader, the big shot, they have needs. And if only we could attend to those needs, we would have much better leadership. We see too many leaders who get to those positions because they have many qualities, they have many skills, but if they haven't resolved some of their own needs, destruction happens. I love the part of Maja's book that outlined these sticky emotions. Those are very telling because they keep coming up. So imagine you have a leader who is dealing with unresolved guilt or unresolved envy or unresolved shame. Do you want to be led by somebody who has not sorted out why they feel that way? No, you don't. Because it could be that their competence, their expertise is so brilliant that they pull off something magical and wonderful. Could be. But working with them, contributing to those endeavors, is going to be very hard because you're constantly feeding two hungry mouths. The mouth of the enterprise that requires your work and your input, and the mouth of the leader who hasn't resolved their own needs. And it's just a waste of energy. And we'll go back to the need to summon it and then devote it to the things that move us forward, not that just kind of, limit the damage of this broken soul that is your manager.
I find unfulfilled wants, they create other wants that become more and more peripheral in those circles of wants, such that whenever we see excessive greediness, excessive grasping fundamentally out there in society, it is not because people are very centered and fulfilling their core wants. It's because they're laboring so far out, they're so far away from knowing really what they need at the core, that they just pick this one thing. It could be power, it could be in a bad way, it could be money, it could be something, and they just keep trying to turn that same wheel over and over again. So usually whenever you see access in societal, the way that leaders deal with things, it's because there's something missing at the core. Because a fulfilled want kind of reduces, unfulfilled wants gets hungry. That's what Tiziana's talking about, these hungry mouths. It's like these people who are hungry for something more and more and more usually indicates something missing at the very core. Something is not fulfilled at the core.
And are the biggest culprits of that those sticky emotions that that Tiziana was mentioning that's in your book?
The sticky emotions are signals that there is an unfulfilled want. So the culprits are unfulfilled wants that somehow these individuals just didn't know how to fulfill. And so they started associating with other things, and they were trying to get these other things. And then this thing at the core, whatever this thing is, self-worth or validation or whatever is this thing that a lot of us need as human beings, if that doesn't get fulfilled, it will show up in organizations, in behavior of managers, in very destructive ways. Because instead of then, at some point, it gets so desperate that instead of just trying to receive it, you try to get it. But I want to refer to something else. Tiziana was talking about organizational circle. If managers really understood that each part of the self has this organizational extension, so they would understand how to resolve a lot of the problems they're seeing. So on the side of motivation, if you extend the motivation into organizational side, you will get to understand why it is that employees are not engaged. Engagement comes from their own motivational system being activated. And me telling you what the new organizational goal is doesn't activate your motivational system, right? When it comes to emotion, when you think of what is the collection of emotion, it's the culture. That's what the culture is. It's this, how it is that we deal with the negative signals that are coming. Do we have a proper structure in place to deal with what is problematic and conflicting in organizations? When it comes to the mind, there is such a thing as organizational mind. There's narratives organizations have, right? About themselves, others, what they're doing. Tiziana so brilliantly talked about the organizational body as well. So, if managers understood the extension, they would understand better how to deal with these non-robot employees that are behaving and being at work, and how to get the best out of them.
So the whole is greater than the sum of its parts is a very ambitious goal that a lot of teams and organizations try to achieve. You know, if we come together, we're going to be able to achieve things that any one of us could never have done on our own. Can you share an example? Maybe I'll ask both of you, if you have an example of a time where you've seen it really work, when it's really come together and people have been in a state of growth, the organization has grown, and they've achieved really wonderful things as a group.
And I'm going to ask Tiziana for answer to this question, because where my mind, I kind of have been bred as an academic. So when I think about the sum being better, than the parts, I actually think of it theoretically. I think about all the people that have had insights about psychology I have leaned on and kind of took their information to make something that could be useful to others. So when I think about any cultural product, an idea, I always think, I think of, for example, universities, a place where we're allowed space and time to think thoughts that other people might not have time to think. So this incredible privilege of being in a place where other people have thought, and you can take all that knowledge and all those thoughts and put it together in something that will be useful. So my mind goes kind of historical. And that's another, sometimes people get very touchy about sharing their work, and they're like, well, about IP and stuff. And I always think, what? I have been literally raised by a university, my undergrad and my master's, and all of these fellowships and scholarships. Whatever I have produced, it's because there was a structure to hold me and guide me and nurture me through it. And all ideas I have are basically yours, because you have supported these universities that have come into being. So whenever people say, well, what about IP? And I say, it's the public's, it's the people's ideas. Without that, there would be no book, there would be no new ideas.
I like the idea of you as the university baby. And you've grown so well. You've grown so well and so tall. It's awesome. It's awesome. No, I agree with Maja, absolutely. That's our version of really leaning on each other to do something better than we could do alone. I'll give you an example that comes from research. There's wonderful work on so-called collective intelligence, which you can also call more trivially team performance. And this work has looked at, what are the variables that explain why is it that some teams perform really well, almost regardless of the task. You got a team, and you can make them do, creative things, mechanical things, planning things, and they still do very well. And others that do poorly, regardless of what you ask them to do. And they looked at many, many variables, including just the IQ of the team members, or having a superstar, somebody genius-like. And they found that there are two variables that reliably explain team performance. One is the average level of empathy that the team members have, understanding what is going on with the other teammates. What are they feeling in this moment? Those feelings, much maligned. All of a sudden, understanding them makes the team work like a well-oiled machine, because the humanity has to be seen through the circle. It's not just the wheel, I should say. And the second variable is how evenly distributed the speaking time is in the team. If you need the contributions of all these people and they never get to talk, it's going to be very difficult for them to contribute. So this, again, it's a time when relationally we are capable of letting everybody express themselves, everybody go to the places where they think is relevant to go, without making them do anything, without forcing them down a certain direction. That's what makes a team great. Mm-hmm. Understanding each other, the fact that there's a reason why I'm feeling those emotions. Another perfectly gorgeous line in Maja's book: emotions are rational. And all of this contributes to team performance, makes the sum more than, what to say? I always get it wrong. Basically, it's better together. It's better together than each of us individually. Yes. But you need to attend to all of these facets of conversation. Otherwise, nothing will happen.
Emotions are rational. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's a common statement out there in the ether of emotions being irrational, mm-hmm. quite the opposite. Or, we can't listen to this person right now. They're very emotional at the moment. Mm-hmm. Can you please say more about that?
For sure. It's very interesting. We have evolved with these emotions to guide us to survive better in the world. And so they're very rational and goal-oriented, right? I think I have a section in the book called How Emotions Got a Bad Reputation.
Right.
And so the way that emotions got a bad reputation is that a perfectly rational response and we as an animals would have to a physical threat, right, or obstacle, does have a little side effect, which is moving circulation from parts of our brain that have to do with long-term thinking. So, and notice that this is a little side effect because as humans, we kind of did a little left turn on the evolution and we developed goals that are long-term and goals that are abstract and cognitive, right? And so a very rational response, which is to move circulation away from, if you have a bear chasing you, you're not going to think about your long-term plans. Perfectly rational for the bear, not so rational when you're worrying about, your next deadline. And so what happens, that little tweak, right? This is how, so experiencing other people in states of extreme anger or fear with their prefrontal cortex, that's part of the brain that has to do with long-term thinking, being turned off, gave us an experience of people doing very irrational and potentially destructive things. Mm-hmm. And the rational response to it is, as humans, right, is to say, we took a little left turn. We have to figure out how to bring back the prefrontal cortex on and then continue with what I'm trying to understand, what our emotions are trying to tell us, rather than the malign all emotions. Mm-hmm. It's like maligning traffic signals in a big city. It's not a smart thing to do.
That's right. And I have another quote here to project on the screen, if you don't mind, so that you can just kind of squeeze it in the conversation. So this is from Maja's book. Uncovering reasons why emotions come when they do, how long they stay, and what they want from us will allow us to let them do the work that they were intended for, help us reach our wants. This is brilliant. It applies to individuals. It applies to organizations. When you allow people to feel the emotion, to just stay with them and unpack why. Why am I feeling panicky about this new project? Why am I really frustrated with my teammates? Why is it that I just cannot muster the energy to go to work again today? That's a job. The job is to linger on the emotions. My old friend, who we lost much too soon, Sigal Barsaid, was one of the great researchers on emotions in organizations. And she would always say, emotions are informative. You must listen to them. This was in application to organizations. Precisely for this reason, they guide you. They tell you what is going wrong and requires maybe a restructuring, maybe requires different developmental opportunities for people. They give you so much of such a big hint as to what you need to address. And when you stamp them down and you cover them, you are missing the greatest opportunity to improve.
People forget that negative emotions are more informative than positive ones, right? Positive emotions just tell you, keep going. I mean, it doesn't tell you much. Negative emotion is going to tell you exactly what, how, under what circumstance. It's very, I mean, this is why we have 75% negative emotion, and the same thing in organizations. Having them, it's a very, you want to know what's going wrong.
So when you said emotions are informative, I think you both play tennis. I think a lot of times...
Some better than others, but it's okay. We can take the humiliation because we are very strong people.
Very strong.
I dealt with all of my things, and so I can take being
Of course.
beaten,
There's been a lot of self-development here for Tiziana.
I've been beaten by Tiziana as well. It's a back and forth, joyful...
It's not. This is just misrepresenting the situation, but it's okay. We're going to go with the lie. We're going to take it up.
So sometimes instead of emotions being informative, emotions can start a reaction. And the chain reaction can be, hitting that tennis ball over the net. You hit it back. I hit it back. And then before we know it, we don't even know when we agreed to start playing tennis, but all of a sudden we're in a really, really long rally. What advice would you give folks that find themselves in that, whether it's in their personal relationships, in their work relationships, or even with themselves? How can you stop that cycle of reactive emotions as opposed to informative emotions?
It's interesting. It's exactly the opposite advice that I would give us when we play tennis. I would say, stop doing things. Stop talking. Stop doing. Just stop. Because basically, if you're in a very strong state of fear or anger, and there's that period before it has come back online, anything that you do will be very short-term oriented. And so once you stop, once you bring back that prefrontal cortex, then it's the question that Tiziana has asked. Why? And what's the resolution, and then what should I do? So there's a process. So if we don't want to be reactive, we just need to just pause. Just take a pause. Drop the ball, drop the racket, and just have a moment until that prefrontal cortex is back on. Then we can hear what it's trying. So if your brain is not working very well, you actually can't understand information. You can't process information. This is why it's not good to give feedback to people who are very scared. They can't process the information you're telling them. And so to process information, you need to bring that part of your brain back. And then you can start asking the right questions that will then eventually guide you to right action.
So to make the comparison into an organization, Maja's just given the advice to pause. In the corporate world or an organization that's moving fast and being competitive in their marketplace, how do those relationships or those teams make time and space to pause and absorb new information?
Well, there's a misconception that the majority of the decisions that have to be made in an organization are urgent and that you only have this hour. And if you don't make it within the hour, horrendous things are going to happen. And it turns out the opposite is true. The great majority of decisions that are made in organization can take time. But we succumb to this sense of urgency that is an artifact in many ways of just the general rhythm of life that we have ended up engaging in, that misguides us. It let us believe that we cannot take a moment. There's some trend now in organizations to create opportunities for mindfulness and those things, but they tend to be a little surface level. They don't really go to why is this anxiety always with me? Why do I feel we cannot sit and reflect? Why can't we do a postmortem on what just happened yesterday? It's just yesterday. And we still think, well, there's today and there's tomorrow. And so I'm not going to think about yesterday, but yesterday is informing you. So these are the things that, again, come when you don't allow yourself to open the can of worms. And sometimes it's a bit small can. Only a couple of worms. Only a couple of
Wormlets.
worms. It's not that terrible. It's not that terrible, but the fear of reflection is one that I think comes from, again, not having resolved something deeper that goes on with each one of us. And we don't allow ourselves to reflect on it. If I lose a tennis match and I feel really horrible about myself, I have to stop. How can I possibly feel horrible about myself for losing a tennis match with a friend that matters for absolutely nothing in this world? It's completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter, but it matters to me. Beautiful opportunity. What do I need that tennis match to do for me? And then you start to go back and uncover things. And so read this book, dear friends, because it will give you a few openings to decide in that moment or later on if you want to do that backward analysis and say, why am I at this point when something trivial and inconsequential affects me? There must be something else. But how long does it take? A flight where you're not bothered by people? You think about it, you stop. That's why it took me more than 2 hours to read your book. It's not because it takes more than 2 hours. It's because if you read it with two goals. I have another slide. Okay, we can put it up.
We're doing it.
We advertise Maja's book for real, man. We're here about promotion. Maja tells us there are two ways to use this book. One is a manual about what self is and how it develops. And two is a guide to your own development. And I was reading this and I thought, I'm going to do both because I'm an overachiever. Why only one? Let's do both. And the first one is endlessly fascinating to me. In my own book, Julie and I spent a lot of time thinking about what are the wants. What are the wants? Some wants are universal. Mm-hmm. We all want safety. We all want self-worth. Okay. Now, how do we satisfy those things? Okay, then you open up a whole lot of possibilities. But super interesting to just reflect on that. As a leader, as a manager, you cannot lead people you don't understand. Mm-hmm. You always have to understand them. Sometimes you can use that understanding to exploit them, certainly. But that's a starting point, so it's fundamental. But then you have your guide to your own development. So if you take it like that, then it takes more than 2 hours to read, because at every turn of page, you think of that example, you think of that moment, you think of that experience, of that episode. Sometimes they go back way, way back. Often, almost always, they go way, way back. And if you really go there, a few hours go by when you're connecting the dots and you're understanding things differently. And I am absolutely certain that if you get to the clarity, it's going to be partial clarity. This is continuous development, as you always like to say. So if you're never done. Mm-hmm. But the extra clarity will make you so much better in your interaction with other people because you're not going to be needy in the same way. I no longer need to go into a research seminar when somebody's presenting their work and show everybody how smart I am. That was my goal for many years early in my career. And now I go, how can I help this person make this project better? Because this research matters. If we do it right, it's going to be more impactful. And I am completely oriented to them. Maybe it's because I've resolved a few things about myself. I certainly have not resolved them all, because it's still the case that I lose a tennis match and I go, okay, something is still not resolved that we need to take care of. But this is work that is so fulfilling when you engage in it.
You could also choose to read my book together with Tiziana's book, because something interesting will happen. You'll find ways in which you can develop a relationship with yourself, like your inner power, that will, so you will find ways in which you can become more valuable person to people around you. So there's ways to transform that will make you better able to feel that inner sense of power in relation to the world that Tiziana so brilliantly describes. So if you end up reading two together, it's not a bad idea.
2 flights. It's okay.
Maja, it took you 7 years
to
put this book together, your first book, The Possible Self. I'm assuming you've changed in that 7-year period of time and developed yourself.
Yes, I hope.
What was your biggest learning from the process of writing this book?
That insight doesn't lead to immediate transformation, right? We can know things and that doesn't transform you. Even things you can connect, even when you connect a lot of dots, that there's actually, neurobiologically, there's a process you need to go to lay down some new neural pathways to get to the transformation. It helped me understand how much we don't understand about process of healing, right? The lack of which causes a lot of societal upheaval when we think about issues with mental illness and homelessness and broader, like international problems, that we don't understand what healing really means. And I think it's time to start thinking forward towards that place, because in the end, people who are not transformed, who are unhealed, they can cause a lot of damage.
Tiziana, what did you learn as sort of your top 3 learnings or your biggest learning from Maja's book?
I would like to project one more slide.
Yes.
Can we? All right. I found this quote very moving. And in some ways, it is the lasting learning from writing my own book. And of course, the central premise of this book is that while we can become destructive at the periphery of our desires, at our very core, we're curious, creative, relational, and intellectual, and we are pulled toward fulfillment by a developmental process that is intrinsically motivated. As beautiful as this quote is, I think it's even more meaningful than it first appears, because this looks like it's about our sense of self, which it is. In my book, Power for All, it applies across the board. Yes, power is often terrible. When Lord Acton said power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, was absolutely right. Power can become, and often we see it displayed in the worst possible incarnation of it. And yet, fundamentally, we all can relate to power in the best possible way. Power is energy to build, to change, to improve, to make the human condition better for more of us. And that's what we mean when we say power for all. We don't mean that power is going to be equally distributed, because it never will be. We don't mean that you read this book and you will rule the world, because you won't. We mean that you can find that version of yourself that can engage with its energy in the best, most productive, most fulfilling way. That is the hope. And we see it all the time. The fact that we focus on power as a nasty, manipulative, horrendous force that is portrayed in movies and history and current events constantly doesn't mean that the majority of uses of these forces is positive. We just don't notice it because negative emotions are way more multifaceted and much more, engaging of our brain than the positive ones.
And there is a narrative, a cultural narrative, and I'm not sure if it's a Judeo-Christian narrative of this good and evil inside of us that are battling. And I was very moved that you picked out that quote, because in a sense, what I'm trying to is turn the page on that good and evil dynamic to say, actually, at the core is developmental good. So at the core, if you know how to use the power, it will be used to create and collaborate and move the world. And if you don't know how to use it like that, then it gets perverted into its variations and versions that are destructive. That's a very different world we live in if you think you are at the core good and evil versus good at the core and evil at the periphery. That's a different existential stance.
And, it brings us back to one of the early theories of motivation organization, Theory X and Theory Y. If you remember, it's old stuff, that said basically managers have one of two theories about the employees. One theory is that employees are bad and they need to be controlled. And they need to be told what to do. And if you take your eyes off them, man, you don't know what they're going to do. They're going to be lazy. They're going to sabotage and all the things. The other theory says no. They want nothing better than do a good job, feel that they're learning, feel that they're becoming better at their domain of expertise, see that it's amounting to something, see that they have impact. That's what they want. You have to decide where you're going to be. And to this day, you see that not every leader sees the good side. And when you don't see it, you're not going to be able to nurture it because you don't even believe it's really there. I think that we're seeing an evolution of, especially in Western business environments, you do see much more sensitivity to this fact that it's up to you and how you lead people to bring out all these things. All the attention that a concept of psychological safety is garnering comes from a perspective where you appreciate the positivity that is there for you for the taking, for the developing. But there's also a whole lot of evidence that we're not there all the time and that we continue to hammer people so that they will behave in a certain way, forgetting all the rest of the wheel, without which nothing rolls. You still need the wheel to roll. That's, I agree with Maja. I think that these two books together, without becoming naive, because they're not. Maja tells you it's hard. It can be done, but you got to work on it. And Julia and I say, power can really take a turn for the worse, and it does very often. But there's an alternative. And the alternative is very clear, and you can pursue it, and you can do better, and you can learn it, and you can look in yourself, become better with yourself, so that you can become better with others. And then the world will be a better place. We cannot succumb to this idea that human nature is screwed up. It is. But we don't have to succumb
at the
to
periphery.
it.
It's screwed up at the periphery and at unfulfilled edges of ourselves that we seem to live in a lot in. Doesn't mean we can't get back to the center.
And it's also not the core.
It's not the core.
It's not the core. And there is a core that is beautiful, just waiting for us to open it up.
So it's almost like, power through fulfillment and fulfillment through this journey of self-development, that really tough work that folks need to do. There's a lot of conversations about purpose. And would you say, Maja, that stitching all of those together would, people think purpose is, I really should be a surfer, or my purpose is skateboarding.
They think a job. They think I tell people think purpose is their most glamorous job.
Do you think that this spectrum of connectivity between self-development, fulfillment, and power creates a sense of purpose in an individual?
I mean, I think of purpose in a very kind of simple biological way. Like, what's the purpose of a tree? It's that it grows into the tree it can become. I think of purpose really inextricable from potential. Potential is really inextricable from the power, the ability to become, right? So also in a relationship to oneself. And so we need to look at purpose moment to moment to moment. Like, this moment has its purpose, it has its potential, and either we can fulfill it or not. And then the next moment after we finish this interview will have its potential. And people who are fulfilled in these moments never sit around saying, what is my most glamorous job? They are living out their lives, they're growing as much as they can. And so the purpose really is us growing into what we can be, and it's fulfilled in the moment and not in the future.
And Tiziana, a lot of corporations will say, we're mission focused, we're purpose driven. How do you interpret that in the context of individuals all trying to achieve that state of fulfillment and purpose on an individual level?
Well, I see those two sides of how humans behave. One is, sometimes the lie. Sometimes it's a lie. There is research on, when all of these missions and the sustainability and the this and the that turn out to be just words. And you get punished when people see through that. So there is then the good side of it all, the real desire for some kind of moral clarity in what you do. And I do see that in people that make hard choices about which organization I'm going to work for. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go to that one because it is unclear to me that they are doing the right thing. Some people do that. I was working with a company recently that produces plastics. Plastics are necessary. We have them everywhere in this environment. We cannot do without anymore. Also because the alternatives are not necessarily better environmentally. Glass weighs a ton. Metal is hard to find, and all the things. So this company, poor things, they're doing their best. They're trying. And they're finding that the young people they're trying to hire are extremely concerned about putting their great skills in chemistry and all the things that they do in service of a company if they don't understand what the sustainability strategy of this place is. So you see people that are actually trying to follow some kind of purpose-animated professional life. Not everybody. There's going to be the ones that just want to make a lot of money. It's fine. Everybody wants a good lifestyle. Everybody doesn't want to be stressed about lack of financial resources. I completely understand. But when it becomes the only purpose, then you have to really read Maja's book because it will remind you that there's something not right when that's all you're thinking about. You are foregoing something certainly much more fundamental in the process. And that's, I think that's where the corporate purpose and the individual purpose really have to be seen again. Does it matter at the corporate level that you're pursuing a purpose if profitability suffers? Possibly, because we do compete with other organizations. So if I cannot keep the financial health of the organization going, I may succumb. And then if I don't exist, I certainly cannot pursue any purpose because I don't exist anymore. So I understand that these tensions, but you cannot allow such noble ways of running your company to be hidden behind a lie. It's not going to be good for your health in the long run as a leader. One day you will regret it. And then you have to read the chapter of the book about regret. and maybe unwind some of those things that led you there in the first place. Don't do that to yourself. It might be too late by then.
So last word to you, Maja. Tiziana's talking about making sure you don't lie within your organization. How can we ensure we're not lying to ourselves on becoming the possible self, trying to achieve and pursue self-development? What advice would you have to our listeners to get those false narratives out of the way and pursue it?
My God, the biggest question on how to avoid self-deception at the very end, that's a very big question. And the reason why it's problematic is because mind becomes engaged becomes a tool of self-deception, and mind is a very tricky thing. So it can tell you stories and narratives about yourself that are not true. This is why listening to those more visceral experiences like your emotions become important, because emotions have harder time in lying. And so if you tell yourself, oh, I'm doing great, this is exactly what I want to do, but there's the dread. There's the background dread every time you wake up in the morning. It's the dread you need to listen to and not a story.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you both so much.